Well, hello everybody, and welcome again to the Conversation Hub. It is my great pleasure to introduce someone who's become a good friend over the last few years, Simon Etherington from the GC Index, Chief Strategist. Perhaps you'd like to sort of say a little bit about yourself, Simon, and then we can talk about what we're going to discuss.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. It's lovely to be here as well, Michael, as always with yourself. So I'm looking. So I guess, a little bit about me. Well, I kind of fell into what I now call the people space, I suppose, with the GC Index. We'll talk about that in a minute. But my background is more around in the sales environment. So I grew up in the IBM world of IBM sales training and was there for about 10 years or so. And then I moved to SAP and I was there for 11 years. I ended up on the exec board there for 4 of those years. And when I left, I then ran a couple of other software companies. And we ended up in 2017 selling, as a management team, selling a business for over €1 billion. And at that point, I kind of semi-retired, Michael. But I was then approached by a couple of people that I knew, and they said to me, look, what are you doing? And I said, well, not a lot. And they said, we're setting up the GC Index. Why don't you come and have a look at it? So I did, and I thought it was amazing. And I became a director and a joint owner in the business. And now I'm working harder than I've ever worked in my life, Michael, but I love it. So it's great. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Well, thank you, Simon. And that working harder than we've ever worked before. I think you and I have both had this sales to reasonable prosperity, and then now we're working for ourselves. It's harder.
Exactly.
One of the things that I wanted to bring straight into the conversation was, how do we go about selecting people for a company? And I want to run through a couple of things and then sort of hand over to you. We really talk about, both us as a business and as a GC partner, and obviously you are the partner. We talk about the 4 quadrants of knowing who someone is. And we talk about someone's skills and experience. And we talk about that in one half, the quadrant, if you like, where, and that we often find out through interview, through certification, and also through the process of a CV being written and taking references. Then we have the psychometrics of it all, the psychology. And for a long time, there are 150 licensed psychometric tests in the UK. My goodness, do we need any more? And that's another part of it. But we don't really know, what is someone going to focus on and do in the first 100 days, 360 days of their employment? What do you think we've done in that space that we can really now point to?
Yeah, I think you raised a really important point. At the moment, like you say, the real data that we have about people when they're coming to interview or when they're coming on their CVs is primarily backward looking. What skills have they acquired, and also what experience have they had? But what we really want to know is what impact they're going to make in our role with our manager or with their manager or in the team or in the culture or whatever it might be. So we really need a forward-looking data. And I think that's really where the GC Index plays. It's looking at what impact an individual might make in any kind of organization moving forward. It's interesting what you say there, because I was at the Recruitment and Employment Confederation a couple of weeks ago now. They're a partner of ours, and they brought a group of people together looking at the recruitment industry at the moment. And the consensus was that the biggest challenge right now is that all of the recruitment agencies are stuck, because based on AI, all of the CVs are starting to look quite similar. So how do they know who to talk to? How do they know who to actually bring to interview? And so the whole industry is going through a real change at the moment through that space. And I think one of the things that we can bring to bear on that is that we can, any of our clients, if they're on a subscription model, they can use an unlimited number of external recruitment links, as we call it, for recruitment. So we might have 20 people applying for a job. And what we turn around to them and say, well, thank you very much for approaching it. We've got your CV, that's great. The next step, though, before we decide on whether we want to bring you to interview, is please, can you complete the GC Index? Now, what that gives us is more data. And this data is how well do they align to the role that we're looking for. Yeah, in the sense that, are they going to be engaged and energized by it? Are they naturally going to be inclined to make an impact in it? Which is really important data. I mean, the first question I would always ask a hiring manager is this: would you hire someone who is not engaged and energized by the role? And of course they wouldn't. Yeah, we always get that response. It's probably more important than having exactly the right skill, exactly the right experience, and so on. Yeah. But how do you know it? How do you know that? Because the only way you can start to get an idea about it is to get them to interview in the first place, and then use your own gut feel, your own intuition to try and understand, do we think this person's engaged and energized by the role? Because the candidate is definitely not going to say to you, I'm not engaged and energized by it. Okay. So what we start off with is that perennial, the first question is, who are we going to bring to interview? Now, the CV is going to tell us about their skills, it's going to tell us about their experience, and that's all great. But the GCNX data is now telling us, is this individual going to be engaged and energized in the role, right? Before we decide whether to bring them to an interview or not. And that's a huge, powerful way of drilling down into who are the right people that we want to bring. And finally, you know, people turn around and say, well, that's saying potentially that you're choosing people not to bring to interview. Well, of course, that's true. But the reason is that we don't consciously want to put someone into a role where we know that they're not going to be engaged and energized by the role. It's not going to be good for their well-being. It's not going to be good for their career. You know, why would we want to do that? Yeah, and why would the individual want to do that as well? So it all works out from that side. So that's the first bit I would comment on.
Yeah, and sorry, I just wanted to sort of just highlight what you've said in one area. You talked about the future, and we talk all the time with our clients about what is the difference between accountability over responsibility. And we always term that, we don't have time to go through it all here, but effectively accountability is about looking forward 80%, 70% of the time. And responsibility is about retrospectively looking back at what you should have done or what you were responsible for. And I think that the GC index, which is why I loved it when like you, I had a moment of the road to Damascus thinking, wow, this actually is a tool that makes me look forward, can make our clients look forward, and actually accesses the very thing that we are interested in. My personal and also the company mission is within this: passion and potential. What is the individual passionate about? Yeah. And then if they're going to have impact, what do they have potential for? So back to you.
No, I totally agree with that as well, because when we first get that individual, when we decide on the person that we want to bring in to the organization, we then get into this whole onboarding process. Now, for me, onboarding is possibly one of the worst processes that most companies do. It's one of the least focused on in a way. And we've all been through it. You know, we might have a couple of days where we meet people, where we might sit in front of presentations, we might be told how to use some of the systems and all that great stuff. But how does the manager of a new employee, how do they really get to understand how to get the best out of that employee in as short a period as possible? Which is what we really want to do in onboarding. You know, we want to make that individual as productive as possible in as quick a time as possible. Because if we think about it, whenever we ask the question, and we go to a lot of conferences, etc., we ask a lot of organizations. We've got over 11,000 organizations using the GCNX. You know, we always ask this question: how long do they think it might take for a manager to learn how to get the best out of an employee? And the typical answer is between 6 and 12 months, maybe longer. Now that's interesting, because if I've got a company of 1,000 employees and I've got 10% churn a year, then at the six months level, that's 50 years every year of non-productivity. It's a huge drain on the organization. And if we could change that 6 to 12 months to maybe with a GCNX to a matter of days, what an amazing productivity improvement that might be. And I think one of the great things about the GCNX is that everyone gets their own personalized AI tool when they take it. It's called ChatGCT, and it enables them to ask any question about their environment based on their own particular profile. And there are nearly 100,000 profiles in the GCNX.
Yeah.
So what we suggest then in the onboarding process is that, once we've done all that great stuff, orientation, all that fantastic stuff, get them to sit down at a screen, right, with ChatGPT and ask it questions of, this is my profile, this is what I'm being asked to do. How might I best make my impact in the first 90 days? Or how might I engage? This is my manager's profile, this is my profile. How might I best engage with my manager? How might I work best with them, collaborate best with them? Where might I frustrate them? Yeah. And the same with their colleagues as well, and vice versa. So within a matter of days, everyone that's involved has got a much better understanding of how to get the best out of that individual, where they're going to fit in, how they can collaborate, etc. And it's really starting to be built into that kind of employee life cycle now, because we had a great session with the NHS supply chain where they said this is their employee life cycle, and they gave us the whole piece, and we mapped across the GCNX and the data and the tools in terms of how might it apply every element of that life cycle. And one of the things that they had on their particular one was that in that first onboarding phase, they wanted people to understand how they're going to get on with their manager, how they're going to get on in the team, how they're going to go on in their role, all that great stuff. And immediately they could do that with the GCNX, which meant that they were bringing forward their kind of productivity by months in each individual. And it also created an environment where those individuals, felt much more comfortable. They knew where they were. They could understand how they could make an impact, and therefore it was great. And they were going to get engaged straight away in that process.
You often talk within the community and broader about the power questions. And one of the power questions I always love is, what's your purpose in your own onboarding strategy with your employees? And it's often almost like an earthquake. You can see people reacting to almost shrinking back. Purpose? What are you talking about? We have a purpose for the business. I don't need a purpose to onboard people. And that also leads, and that's a huge subject which we couldn't possibly cover in a fireside chat or a conversation hub. But one of the things you sort of poke into, which I really love, is the ChatGPT. And what you've just talked about, I also want to highlight to people. When you're writing a job description, you can use the same tool. And what that does is it does two things. It does many things, but let's take two critical ones. It really highlights what it is you're looking for, or what it is you haven't described that you're looking for. And we all have this, you and I, we'll put our hands up and say, we've been here, we've been CEOs, MDs. We actually don't know precisely how we want to write descriptions and important jobs. So within the 5 domains of the GC index of game changer, strategist, implementer, polisher, and playmaker, you start to get a sense of, well, actually, you've written this as though you want an implementer, and yet you're telling us you need a plan and a strategy and an imagination and a future for the business. Why have you written it like this? And I find that's really fantastic, because you can then, that's a positive tool for, I'm not going to use the D word, but let's say choosing who you want to interview, because it's not negatively, subjectively discriminative. And opening this up, I'm having a discussion next week. Well, actually, we're playing golf and then having a discussion with a young man who's a CEO of an established recruitment business, and this is exactly the topic we're going to discuss. He's just done his own GC index. So please take us a bit further down that journey, and maybe some of the things I've said you want to pick out and sort of nail me on or highlight.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, who wants to write a job description in the first place, right? That's a painful exercise. Yeah. And in most organizations, we ask our HR team, if we have one, to write it, or others we have to do it ourselves. And most of the time, a job description is looking at what skills we need people to have, and then also what experience we want them to have had. But the reality is, what we really want to explain in that job description is what is the impact that we want this person to make in the role. Yeah, so how are they going to make an impact in the organization? And as I say, how are they going to make an impact in those 5 areas that you talk about? Do we need someone to come in who's going to help us think about transformational possibilities, new ways of doing things, new product areas, new markets to enter, all that kind creative elements of what we could do? Do we need someone to come into a role where they're going to help us think about the bigger picture, how we align it to our purpose, how we look at the strategy and the plans and the processes around that, and how we communicate that to all of our key shareholders in a way that they understand? Do we need someone to come in and get things done, to achieve things, to make things happen, deliver outcomes, etc., drive our teams forward to deliver what we need to achieve in the organizations, and so on? So what we start to see with the job description is that we can either use ChatGPT, or we have another tool called GC Translate, where we can just put in the job description as GC Translate. And this is one of the reasons why the GCNS is becoming the fastest growing recruitment assessment tool in the world. Because, well, it's 2 reasons. One is I can put the job description straight into GC Translate, and it will translate for me, based on the words and phrases I'm using, what impact am I alluding to that we're looking for in that role. And to your point, we can now have a conversation with the business owner that says, is this a business impact you want them to make? Yeah. Or have we got to rewrite it a little bit? We've got to change it a little bit, etc. And that's really important, because the people who are reading it, i.e. our potential employees, they are going to read it through the lens of the words that we're using. And if we're going to use the wrong words for what we're going to implement, we're going to attract the wrong people. So it's important to get that right. And then, of course, that means that now we've got an understanding of what are we looking for? What is our ideal profile? So we might end up with something that says, I mean, in the GCNS, we end up with a score of 1 to 10 in each of those 5 areas. So it's measuring pretty much where are people most engaged and energized on a level of 1 to 6, 1 to 10 in those 5 areas. And that means that from a job profile, we could say, for this particular job profile, the ideal candidate might have a 6 or more in implementer, and a 6 or more in polisher, and a 5 or more in playmaker, for example, depending on the role. And now it becomes very easy, because when we ask all of our candidates to complete the GC Index, we're going to see all of those candidates' profiles. We're going to see which ones map our job description, our defined and ideal profiles, and then we can determine who we want to bring to interview or who we don't want to bring to interview. And that's pretty revolutionary, in terms of how we're now understanding how the data to be able to make those decisions at that point before getting into interview as well. So I think you're right. I think that job description, now we're transforming the way job descriptions are being written, so that it also includes the impact that we want people to make, as well as the skills, as well as the experience as well.
Absolutely. And we take that phrase you use that I've adopted from the GC about impact. And one of the impacts that we have as a business on our clients is, because we've both been there, sitting there and saying to a CEO, well, how did you put this position? All right, you've asked for a CFO. Everybody wants a CFO. You're a public company. You need to have a CFO. But what do you want them to do? And how are the board looking at this position? Quite often the CFO will sit on the board. Quite often almost certainly they'll be observer for most of the board, except for the closed sessions. So how are you actually interacting with your board? What are you telling them that you want this role to do? What is it you're telling them that you want to achieve? What is the value? What is the growth that this position? And as a CEO, you are, we always say uniquely responsible for growth. That doesn't mean you uniquely do it all, but at the end of the day, if you're not growing, it's down to you as a CEO, not down to anybody else. And that whole discussion, how do you sit with the chair? How does the chair sit in a closed session with the rest of the board, discussing the profile of people they want to hire if it's a closed session?
Yeah.
How do they discuss just with the CEO? What are the aims? What are the objectives? What, answers the question. Tell me, CEO. Yes, Mr. Chair, Mrs. Chair. What is it that you think this hire will deliver in growth to support your growth in the next 100 days? What will they deliver in the first year? Those are very tough questions, because they're very difficult to answer.
Well, you're absolutely right, and in fact, you've kind of introduced, the next level from individual into teams, because obviously, when we're bringing any individual into an organization,
I try and do that conversation.
I know, it's great, because they're going to join a team, and it could be a leadership team, it could be any kind of team. Now, again, when we're looking at the recruitment process, for example, it's all very well knowing what our individual candidates look like and how they might make an impact in the role, and we've defined the role. That's all great, but in reality, they've got to work with their new manager, and then also they've got to fit into the team. So we've also got these two other data points that we can use in the recruitment process, which are, we profile the hiring manager, because 70% of the time, hiring managers will hire people in a similar profile to them. I mean, we all talk about unconscious bias. Well, the biggest unconscious bias in recruitment is the hiring manager. So what we do is we find out what their profile is, so that we understand and we can see the data that says, is this person inclined to then hire people in the same image? Is that right? Is it good? It might still be the right thing for the team, for the role, etc. But we've now got more data to say, actually, you know what? We probably need a bit more of a diverse team. We don't want everyone in the team looking like the manager. That's not necessarily going to be the best way that this team can achieve what it needs to achieve. And then, of course, we'll also profile the team. Now, this is where we start getting into looking and understanding and delivering team workshops, because team workshops are going to be done at any level. Ideally, we start with the leadership team in an organization, because obviously they're setting the tone, they're setting strategy, and so on. And when we do one of those workshops, it's very different to the traditional psychometric kind of workshops. Those workshops tend to be, well, let's have a workshop to get to learn how we work best together, or how we collaborate, or all that kind of stuff. And to be frank, you're going into those kind of workshops with half of the population thinking, oh, this is a waste of time, I want to be back on my day job. With the GCNX, it's very different, because the starting point is, what do we need to achieve? So as a leadership team, what do we need to achieve? And that's always the starting point. And therefore, that's a great starting point, because everyone is in that team to achieve that. So they're all engaged right from the beginning. The second point as well is that then we've also got more data underneath that, because every leadership team or every team has always got a second layer. We've already thought about it. This is how we think we're going to do it. Great. Let's analyze that. And so now we can start to use that data that they've already got to look and put it through the GCNX lens. So, for example, if we said that we wanted to become the leading consulting company in the UK, right? Well, that's a great ambition, and that's what we want to try and be, and that's what we said we're going to be, and that's what we said to the UK market, etc. But to do that, we probably need some polisher energy in the team. We want to drive out excellence. We want to be number one. We want to be very competitive. We want to deliver out all that level of excellence in what we do. So if we do not have polisher energy in our team, we might struggle with that. So the first thing we'll do from that basis is say, okay, this is what you want to try to achieve. This is the kind of energy that you will need to achieve it. Then we start looking at the data. Who have we got in the team? What energy is it? Right. And then we can start applying that and saying how we're going to do this. And at the end of all of that, we might end up and say, well, this is great. This is our team. Our next hire we needs to obviously deliver in that role, deliver that responsibility, have the right skills, have the right experience, etc. But also, as a team, we want them maybe to have a playmaker energy, because we need them to actually bring the team together, or we need them to think about our key stakeholders, or whatever we need them to do. So that becomes another part of our requirement for the role. So those three bits then: the role requirement, the hiring manager and how they're best going to fit with them, and also what we might need for that person to add to the team, to complement the team, to make the team better as well. So those three things go into the mix. It comes out with our agreed profile, and off we go. Let's go and find the right person to make that happen. Yeah. But just to finish on one point that you made there, CFOs could be all kinds of CFOs. We could have a CFO that we really want to drive out excellence in our accounting profiles, or we want a CFO to become a transformational thinker. How do we use different ways of finance to really drive out the growth in our business, and so on? And I'll give you one example. I work. Well, you can probably find out anyway. But Network Rail is a user of the GCNX, and their CFO is a very big sponsor, or previous CFO was a big sponsor of the GCNX. And at the time, he was responsible for looking at the refurbishment of the Waterloo Station, which happened a few years ago now.
Yeah.
And they were going through this whole process, and they couldn't make the numbers work. The cost of it was so big. They were looking at the revenues from the shops, etc. The numbers wouldn't work, and he was really puzzled about it. Anyway, he went on a site visit, and he suddenly said, "Hey guys, what if we were to put a second tier in Waterloo where we could have more shops, we could have more things, etc." And they go, "Yeah, that's brilliant. That's going to make the numbers work." And he was a game changer CFO, right? So he was coming up with new ideas, new ways of thinking, creativity, and you might want that in your roles. It just depends. Every person can bring a different impact to a role.
The first team workshop I did was actually with you, as you'll recall, years ago now.
Yeah.
And that team we identified had a deficit in planning and strategy on paper, looking at, and let's be clear, it is a tool. Just because it's a tool doesn't mean it's a diktat that suddenly tells you everything you need to know. At the end of the day, we are focused on people.
Yeah.
And anyway, we both walked in there and we both had a bit of a chat, and we're going that there's no planning here. There's two people in the team who are very high on what we call the imagination proclivities, and they were both centered in Game Changer. There was nobody in the team who had strategy or planning or seeing the future laid out in the team. There was a six, and I'm sure you can recall who that was. Yeah. But his proclivities were very much in the other two. He was an implementer polisher. So I always remember thinking about this, and we sat and we spoke with the team, and the CEO agreed that we needed more planning and we needed to hire someone who was a strategist. And they've hired many people, senior people. They've also made, and I sat on the board for a while. They also made a number of acquisitions. I won't go into any more details. But what you can say about the acquisitions were there was no, and I'm not talking about a massive business plan, just a business case. Yeah. Why we're doing it, how we're going to do it, and what are we going to get out of it, and what's the basic table of numbers. Didn't exist. And why didn't it exist? Well, because nobody was thinking about it in that sort of way, except for me. That you and I are both 9 or 10 strategists, and of course we might be called a bit anal in this area, but we generally don't go into things and just go, yeah, don't worry, it'll be fine. It's a great idea, let's just go out and implement it, or I know you want to implement something, but let's just make sure what we've got is really great, and let's make it really, really positive. So we'll stop doing that for a minute and we'll go and do, and it's really, I think the most fascinating part of the question that we asked is, how do you make people productive from day one? How do you make them contribute from the very early beginning? Is know more about what they're going to do, know more about what they want to be accountable for, know more about where they want to have impact and where they have passion. And therefore, and you combine that passion and impact, passion and potential with skills, and all of a sudden you've got your impact model, which is exactly what we're talking about.
Exactly. And of course, you're aligning that to your business context. Again, we come back to what you want to achieve. Now, of course, you want to bring people on board to help you achieve what you want to achieve. And I think when you put those elements together, and I think your really, really important point, this is a diagnostic. It's giving us data and information that we can make better decisions on, because we're not saying that people, haven't got the right skills to do things. Of course they do, right? And we don't say that people haven't got the experience. Of course they do. But what we're looking at is saying, in that particular example that you mentioned, we had a team who, as a group, did not have the energy around strategic thinking. And funnily enough, they were moaning about the fact they didn't have a plan, they didn't have a strategy, etc. And that's what happens. When we're not inclined to do it, we won't do it. Which is the important thing.
Simon, amazingly, we're coming to the end of our half an hour. I can't quite believe that. That's incredible. Was there anything you wanted to sort of lead us off with in terms of ending the conversation?
The only thing I'd say is that something personally that I've learned in my journey with the GCNX is that we've got nearly 100,000 different profiles in the GCs, which means that
Yeah.
all very different. Yeah. And we all want to make an impact in a different way.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we've only got one way of thinking in our own heads. So when we're going around the world, when we're having our engagement with people, we naturally have to think that people are like us, but they're not. And I think what the GCNS does is it helps us understand that actually people can be very different. So how do we understand them better? And that's going to minimize frustration. And therefore we can work towards more complementary action, more collaboration. And I think that's the key, is how do we collaborate? And that's why it's an organometric, is how do we collaborate in an organization to achieve organizational goals? And that's why we love it.
Yeah. I think the final thing I would say is that what you've said, but just to emphasize, it's not a psychometric, it's an organometric. It helps with diagnosis. It is not a diagnostic. And that is come and talk to us, come and talk to us at Culture Works Consortium. If you're hiring from the lower levels of the organization right up to board members or even exec members, come and get an insight into why you want to hire, how you're going to do it, and what they're going to deliver for you. Simon, thank you enormously. Lovely to see you again. And I'll let you get back to sunny Richmond. You're lucky.
Thanks very much. All right. Thanks a lot. Cheers now.